And now I would like to introduce to you a model for how to understand a project and how a project is, you could say, the content, how it's developed, and where do we have problem formulations, where do they come from, etc. And how do we put it all together. And for that, just for now, just imagine that you have this curve here, that things are starting right here, and then we come back to the starting point when we end. If you hang on to that idea, it would be really nice. Okay, now we have a problem. You can think about your SPV3. You have a connection to a case company. And in this case, you might have been introduced to the company, and the company may have told you about something that they believe is a problem in the company. And you now are in a situation where you have to figure out, okay, how do I move on from here? How do I get a project out of this? Now, for that, it's a very good idea to start out with stakeholders and to figure out what kind of stakeholders do we actually have in this particular situation. And stakeholders, they can be kind of put into boxes. A stakeholder can be someone who's affected a lot by what you are going to work with, or it can be someone who's not affected by what you're doing. So imagine that we are going to change the whole production, and we are implementing lean and 5S and some other things as well. So the workers, they would probably be affected a lot. The management might not be affected a lot. But the other dimension here is, if we look at power, who has power and who has no power in this situation, then the workers and the production department, they might be affected a lot, but they may not have a lot of power. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take care of them. It simply means they are characterized by being affected a lot, but have no power. So when we are looking ahead for how to implement new ways of doing things, we should be aware of how do we then implement changes for people who's affected a lot, but has no power. And the same goes for people who is not affected a lot, but has a lot of power. And those are probably the people that we are going to talk to and discuss solutions with. So we can categorize these stakeholders into stakeholders who are affected and not affected, and stakeholders who have a lot of power and stakeholders who does not have a lot of power. So when you talk to your contacts for SPV3, for example, is that a person who's going to be affected by your project or not affected? And probably that person will be affected because they probably own the project as well. And is it the person who has a lot of power or low power? So try to think about the people in your project that will be affected or not affected, and who has power and who has not power, and then make sure that you have strategies for approaching these people or organizations in order to understand what then is the problem of the company. Because the company might say, we have this problem. They say that, okay, we have a lot of problems in our production. We simply cannot follow the plans that we have. We always we are late, etc. And then if you buy into that, then you might find out, if you investigate, that it's not really the production that's the problem. It's actually the sales department, because the sales department, they are selling everything to everybody at a low price, and therefore they are putting a pressure on the production department, and they are not taking into consideration that we have a capacity that we have to live up to. They are not checking with the production department when they are selling things. But it seems that now it works quite well in the sales department and the production department is the bad guy, but it might be the opposite. So therefore, sometimes companies, they haven't identified the right problem. So we need to help them with that. Okay, now another way to check out on the company problem is to investigate, and CP simply means company problem here. We need to, as VCM people, we have to recognize that we have a structure in our education. We have different semesters. Right here, we have semester 1. How can we use semester 1 in understanding the company problem? Well, it's pretty simple, but also quite important. If we look at semester 1, now think back. What kind of courses did you have last year when you attended semester 1 at VCM? Well, one course was marketing management. Now, what you have to do in order to investigate the company problem in a systematic way is that you take a stand in the stakeholder analysis, then you collect information from the company, you listen to the company, you listen to the guys describing the problems, and then when you are home alone or in your team, you sit down and then you go back to your marketing management course from first semester. You take out those 7, 8, 9 main issues that you had from marketing management and, for example, point out at something called competitor analysis. So, and then you ask yourself, are there anything from this situation here that has a relation to competitor analysis and competitor understanding from marketing management? And then you move on to the other pointers from marketing management, because that would help you understand the company problem with a new perspective. Then you do the same thing with business economics. You do it with supply chain management. You simply ask yourself questions. If I look at this problem here with the eyes of supply chain management, and then you remember that in supply chain management, we also had about 6, 7, 8 major areas that we were working with, then is this area from supply chain management something that can help me understand this problem here in the company? And then you might say no, or you might say yes, actually, there was something here that I can understand the problem in the company by understanding the relation to supply chain management. So in that way, you're working in a systematic way with understanding the problem of the company. And therefore, that will qualify you much more in a discussion with the company and qualify you to be able to define the problem that you are going to work with later on. And it's not a surprise that TQA would be the same. And we have math. Now, that was first semester. And also, we do the same with semester 2. Take up, go back, reflect upon the courses you had on your second semester, list them as I have done here, and then relate them to the company problem and figure out, okay, this specific course from second semester, how is that related to this one? What were the major issues in second semester course, this and this, and then write down a few notes. And then we simply move on to where you are right now, semester 3. Take the courses that you have right now. I know that you have to apply the courses you are having right now on your third semester. That's okay. But also remember that what you learn now here on your third semester builds upon what you learned on your second, that builds upon what you learned on your first. So therefore, you can gain a lot of free knowledge by simply doing this little exercise that I recommend you to do right here, right now. And then, of course, semester 4, you're not there yet, but when you do your semester 4, do the same thing. 5th semester, internship, 6th and 7th semester. So I also recommend bachelor thesis writers to do exactly this, and they benefit a lot from doing it in this way. So what happens then is that when we have investigated what do stakeholders say, and what kind of systematic approach can I have as a student to understand the problem, then we can start understand, okay, then we might actually be able to formulate a problem that we can work with. Because when the company describes something, they might not be quite sure what they want us to do. And if we want to do everything, we end up doing nothing. So therefore, we have to investigate and we have to formulate a specific problem that we will find down here. And formulating a specific problem that we will solve is to ask the question, what? What is it that we are going to solve? Reflect upon your 3rd semester project. What is it that you are going to solve? What is the main problem here? What is the problem formulation? That is the what. Then, having done all of this, talking to our teams, investigating the courses, understanding the company, having the input from the stakeholders, has helped us to formulate that particular problem. But also, in that process, it has helped us to understand how are we going to answer this. And that is why we have sub-questions. And sub-questions are, how are we going to investigate this problem here? So when we have a problem formulation, it's a simple matter of agreeing upon what is it we are investigating. And then having sub-questions is a simple question of how are we going to investigate this. So therefore, problem formulation is a very long process, and it takes a lot of work in order to get up and come up with a good problem formulation. But don't worry, just take your time and be systematic, as I have indicated here and here and here. And then you will have a way to formulate your problem, which is what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? So that is the essence of explaining how to, or explain to a reader, what is it that you are going to do right here. And then before, you would probably have a little explanation and introduction to what is the project here about, and you might mention something from the stakeholders, you might mention something about the consequences that they're experiencing right now, and you might actually also get into some of the courses or the subjects that you are going to touch upon. And then that lead the reader to understanding exactly, okay, now I understand what is going to be investigated. And then you explain to the reader, how are you going to investigate this? So if you want to investigate how is the production department, how effective has it become after they have introduced lean, then one of the sub-questions, the how, would be, for example, to investigate how are things right now, what kind of motivation, etc. So you're specifying questions that will help you investigate, and when you get the answers, you can use it in an analysis. Now, having that in place, we need to delimit ourselves, because when we have a problem formulation and sub-questions, we cannot do everything. So therefore, we need to explain to the reader and to ourselves, what are the delimitations? We cannot really do everything. So we might need to do limitations. And therefore, looking back at your 3rd semester here, you probably need to delimit yourself from some of the subjects that are being dealt with in some of the courses. And you might have to pay extra attention to something from specific courses, but that is a decision that you need to make based upon what are you investigating, how are you investigating it. So delimitations is also about pointing out to yourself, your supervisor, and the reader, what are we focusing at? Then having that in place, you have to introduce to the reader, yourself, and your supervisor, what kind of specific theory are you going to use? What do you choose? And of course, in a third semester project, you are more or less obliged to choose theory from semester 3 in order to demonstrate that you have the competences to apply theories from semester 3. Then having that in place, what kind of theory you are going to use, then we start to get back to some other things that we have been talking about, namely research design. And research design is, and now we are using these fancy words again, it's about what object do we investigate? What is the ontology? What is it nature given, or is it cultural given? And how are we going to know what we would like to know? And what kind of methods are we going to apply? So note that up here, we have decided what we will investigate. We have figured out how we are going to investigate it. We are pointing at a specific direction. We are choosing specific theory. That specific theory indicates to us that we have to get specific kinds of data, and that data need to be collected. And that is where we design our research. But we have to look at the object. What kind of data is it that we are looking for? And therefore, we are applying everything that we have just learned today as well. And that means that having the research design in place, we can go out and collect the data. And how do we collect data? Well, we can do interviews. We can visit databases. We can visit the library. We can do questionnaires. We can do lots of things. And we have to think in the model about primary data, secondary data. That was one axis. And we have the other axis, which is internal and external. So we decide on theory. We design what data we are going to collect. Then we collect the data. Maybe you are given data from the company, but if not, start out by asking for internal secondary data. Also visit the library and other databases where you can find secondary data that is external to your company, but might help you understand the problem. And then maybe even plan for collecting some data yourself. That would be primary data. So that means right now, we are at a stage in the process where we have data. And that means that when we have data, we can start to do our analysis. So analysis simply means to break down data and organize data in different ways to understand what are these data telling us. Therefore, when we have collected the data and starting our analysis, we go back and say, okay, we have chosen this theory. If it was, let's say, for example, marketing management from the first semester, and we had chosen something about buying behavior, business buying behavior, then we would go back and say, okay, this little thing, this is the theory about business buying behavior. It also means that now we have designed a research where we have business buying behavior, that's the investigation. We believe that it's cultural given in companies. And we also believe that we cannot really measure it, so we need to talk to people. That's the way we generate knowledge. That's the epistemology. And therefore, we need to do interviews. That's the methodology. So we have been interviewing people in companies about how they are buying products within our area. So that means we have specifically interviewed people, and then we have collected lots of data, and that data is now up for analysis. That means we are going back to our theory. We have a model for what is business buying behavior. So of course, we are using that model to analyze the data that we have collected, because there's a loop here. We have to use theory that we have chosen because they help us to define the research, help us to understand what data to collect. And therefore, when we have collected the data and we start analyzing, we must use the theory that we have chosen before. So that's an important point. Then, of course, the analysis brings us to an evaluation and discussion of the results. So the analysis builds upon the theory, and the theory also helps us to evaluate and discuss. So therefore, sometimes it can be difficult to differentiate between analysis, evaluation, and discussion. They might come in the same package, so to speak. It also means that when we get to this point, we might actually need to bring in new theory. So you may have chosen theory at this point of your project, and that makes a lot of sense because this is the object under investigation. We research, we have the design, we collect the data, we analyze it, and then when we start analyzing it, we find out, oh, but there's something here that we really do not understand. But then we might know from another course in third semester that this new information that we get from discussing the results of the data collection, that might be understood in another way by using theory that we didn't apply when we started the project. And that is perfectly okay. That's allowed. And also, I would even say demanded of you that if you can see you need to bring in new theory, you have to do it. But in semester projects, you should stay within the scope that your supervisors has indicated. And then having that evaluation and discussion, we simply come up with recommendations. That could be how to implement, how to change things, how to make sure that we are doing right. And it simply means that the recommendations are also built on existing theory, what we have been doing down here, and also maybe new theory, because we might want to bring in ideas about change management. So we come up with our recommendations, and what is it we recommend? Well, we recommend a solution. That is why we have the last green pointer here. We recommend a solution to the company problem. So that is why everything in this circle here is connected, because we start out by the stakeholder analysis. We start out by understanding the problem, and we start out by understanding the problem even further by applying the knowledge that we have from our education. That is your competence level as a student. You have competences given to you by yourself, by studying, and by the courses you have had. And based on that, you are capable to understand the company, and you are capable of formulating a specific problem to solve. Therefore, when you have formulated what and how, when you recommend a solution, you recommend a specific solution to the problem formulation. That is why your supervisors and the external evaluators in Denmark called censors, that is why when they read a project, they go to the first page and they read the problem formulation and the sub-questions. And then they skip the rest. They don't read this. they go directly to the end of your project and read your recommendations, because they want to check if this is what you are going to investigate and this is how you have intended to investigate it. Then I, as a reader, I want to know, what do you recommend? That is your conclusion. So a normal reader would start by reading your problem formulation sub-questions and then go straight to the end and say, okay, what are then the recommendations? And then the person might agree or disagree, but only then the people start to look into, say, okay, what about delimitations? Does it make sense to do these kind of delimitations? And then they start to reflect upon, okay, they choose this kind of theory, but now they understand more about your delimitations and your choices of theory because they have seen your recommendations. So in that way, they are capable of evaluating whether it makes sense what you do in this area right here. So that is an important thing to remember. Make sure that you define this and make sure that you actually recommend and conclude on your problem formulation. That's really important. So basically, that's why I started out with this one here. And just to take it a bit further, if you look at this one, same model, but all the blue stuff here, that is your project description. And when you have a project description, that is your contract with your supervisor. So that means your supervisor is very interested in you being able to extract what do we have from the stakeholders and what do we learn and have learned from our courses in order to define what to investigate and how. And then your supervisor will help you with asking critical questions about, okay, what about your delimitation? What about your choice of theory? Are you sure this might be the right kind of theory? What if you twist it a little bit? Okay, what about the research design that you have here? These data that you are thinking of collecting, how do they match with the sub-questions, etc.? Which is why when we are talking about how we're investigating things, we are very interested in what are the theories connected to it and what kind of data do we want to collect in order to get answers to these sub-questions. So all of this is a project description, and this is your contract with your supervisor. And therefore they want to approve your project description, which is then from the guidelines. You can find it here on chapter 7, where you have the project description. You can see that. So that is the connection to the guidelines, you might say. And then you should remember that the final project report that actually build on your project description, but it is adapted, and it does not necessarily have everything from the project description going into the project report, not necessarily, because you might actually have a lot more here than you actually put into your report. So that's a prioritization from your side. Good. So as an ending remark here, all projects, also SPV3, must have reflections on the knowledge they create. That was epistemology, right? And the way that knowledge is created and collected. So that is why we have theory of science. So ontology, not a difficult thing. It's just what is reality? Is it nature given, culture given? Epistemology, how do we recognize reality? Means how do we recognize what we know? It's about qualitative, quantitative data. And methodology is about, okay, how do we then collect it? And then as a short introduction to theory of science on fourth semester, that different combinations of ontology, epistemology, and methodology will create different kinds of paradigms. Positivism in one end, interpretivism in the other end, And as one of you said here during the lecture, that we might not really be only cultural given or nature given. Sometimes when we are looking at things within VCM, it might be some kind of combination, but mostly cultural given. So we might find VCM paradigms in here somewhere, but we'll talk more about that when we get to our fourth semester. Okay, now